So we are returning and we are continuing on Unit 2. Remember that all the unit information can be found under unit modules. But now that we have started Unit 2, I like to use shortcuts to go right to where we were, right? And that shortcut is right underneath the unit module. It's this assignments button off the home page of our course. And sure enough, we know that we're working in Unit 2, but the deliverable, that the project we're working on, is Exercise 1. So this just takes you right to where we post Exercise 1 along with the directions. And I think I've got from most of you your selection of what your reference is. If you want to change that, mine was Aesop's Fables, you can edit your post by clicking on these three dots and say edit, and say I wasn't able to find enough line art that I liked for Aesop's Fables, so I'm just going to put fairy tales, right, and widen it. The good thing about creating your own work and not working for a client for these samples is that you can make it whatever kind of creative output you'll be most interested in for your portfolio. So take advantage of that. And then once you're done editing, you do have to hit the save, the blue button. So I have not posted much, right? And what I'm trying to get to is this kind of product where I've layered up at least 5 source materials and then edited them, erased them, changed them, manipulated them into something that is my own composition. And we are doing a theme that is based on a favorite cartoon, comic strip, or children's book. And if you missed last class and you missed this class and you're trying to make up and learn these skills and keep up with us in the course outline, it's absolutely fine if you do the banned book theme, and you follow these direct examples. It's all about learning the skills. Right? I just try to keep it entertaining by changing it up a little bit each semester. So we need to know what to do next. The next step is not in Canvas. As the directions show, the next step is using a raster-based program. And in the last videos, what I demoed last class, which you can always view through the Arts Lab YouTube, which you can always find from the home page, and the links, which are all the external resources, right? That first link is the YouTube. Nope, the second link is the YouTube. So when you go to the YouTube, you do need to do a little bit more. It will show you my most recent videos, but I have multiple classes. So the way to understand this and make use of this to review, especially if you miss class, is to go to playlists. And then in the playlists, I'll have a playlist for each exercise and assignment for each class session. So we are the Adobe session because we learn everything through Adobe Creative Cloud. So when you view the full playlist, you'll see everything we did last class. About 4 15-minute videos that got us to where we are. Now, because we're getting used to using Adobe Photoshop and getting used to mimicking using Adobe Photoshop with freeware when we're outside of class, I've been demoing it in 2 places. So where do I find those files? At the base of your computer, you have your dock, and your dock will have 2 folders. It shouldn't have more than that. It has, just like a desk has 2 drawers, it has close to your trash can, which should remain empty. It will have a downloads folder. This is your junk drawer, where all this crazy stuff from the internet goes and stuff you don't want in your clean folder. And then it has the locked documents folder. That's where your class folder should be, right? And last class, we labeled our class folder with our names, all in capitals, and we also gave it an icon image. So you are my morning class. This is that folder. Instead of opening that folder from the documents folder, I encourage you to actually drag it onto your desktop. Not copy it onto your desktop, drag and drop it. So now it's outside of the drawer and on your desk to work on. That makes it really easy to find and to open. And once you open your folder, your master class folder, you should have an exercise 0 and an exercise 1 folder. We're working on exercise 1. That's why I label it with a yellow. That means like pay attention to this. It's not completed yet. It's in progress. And then I look for the green files. The green files are my way of labeling my PSDs, because the image can look like all the other images. But the PSD files are the ones that are multiple layers that you are editing. So I'm going to open up one of these by right-clicking and saying Open with Photoshop. And we use Photoshop 2025, and this is where I left off. Then I'm going to open the next one just to continue showing you both ways. But I'm going to open the browser photop.com. Now I've done more on the Photoshop one than on the Photop one, but you'll see that they are both very similar in terms of how they are laid out, right? So what are we learning with this project? We are learning to organize, work between, and edit multiple layers. You're required to use at least 5 different source images, so you should have at least 5 different layers. And we're going to work on them individually. Here I've only imported 2 layers, right? The next thing we learned is that in order to edit the layer by actually removing pixels, which is important, we need to first right-click on the layer and rasterize. So it no longer has that little black box in the layer window, and that means we're able to do things like lasso around certain things and delete them, which reveals the layer underneath. The other thing we learned is that when a layer has both black and white pixels, which would be a JPEG more often than not, we want to only see the line art. We only want to see the black pixels. So we're going to change the blending mode of that layer from normal to multiply. And that lets only the darkest pixels come through. It doesn't mean only black pixels. If you had blue pixels in there, red pixels, anything that's darker than white, that will come through. We also learned how can we clean up the images, play with the images. As long as you've rasterized them, you can go to Image Adjustments, and we're learning how to play with levels. Levels is the brightness and darkness. So the very last thing I did with this class was I took a color image, and it's not going to remember it in my history, because your history restarts each time you close a file and open it. But the last thing I did was take color out of this image. But I'm going to demonstrate that again because it's a skill we'll be using later, even if you don't need it for this project. So how can I get back the color that I lost? Well, that is why we organize it in this way, where we always save our reference files. So in my exercise 1 folder, I not only have my PSD files, but I also have the images I downloaded that are making my layers. So I can always go back and get that original layer. And you see it comes in, and it comes in as a smart object that's protected, and it comes in on top of the one that I cleaned up. So how do I go from this to this? Well, first, I need to rasterize it so I can edit it. Otherwise, all I can do is change its size. I can't change its colors. I can't delete. The next thing I'm going to do is go to Image Adjustments. These are called direct adjustments because they directly affect the pixels in your selection. And in this case, I'm selecting that whole layer. And I'm going to say Levels. Levels is for lights and darks. So if I'm really trying to boost the whites, clarify the black outlines, minimize the color, this is the histogram. The histogram shows me white pixels here, black pixels here, any pixels that are other than white or black. So they could be gray, they could be yellow, they could be orange, they could be green. All of those are in the middle. If I move these sliders, what I'm doing is saying that all the pixels that were to the right of this white triangle now are pure white. Wherever that white triangle is, those pixels are now all just solid white. So if I move this all the way over, that's what happens. Right? So I don't want to move it all the way over. I want to move it because this is what's called posterizing, where we're refining it to limited colors from multiple colors. So I am making basically everything that's lighter than 50% gray, I'm making it white. Now I'm going to take the blacks and the same thing. Anything that's darker than 50% gray, I can make black. And then I can say, yeah, that looks pretty good, but it made these lines a little too chunky. So maybe I want to move that slider back a little bit and then push the whites a little bit more so that those lines are a little bit thinner. So that's as much as I can do with levels for this. Now, how do I get rid of the color? Because it would be a real pain to have to lasso around all the yellow pixels, all the orange pixels that remain. So now that I've posterized it with levels, you can see really clearly white pixels and black pixels. What I'm going to do is just select the black pixels. So this is a new selection tool. So far we've been using the lasso, like scissors, right, to cut things out. Now I'm going to use a different selection tool, which is just as common in Photoshop use. And that is underneath the lasso, it is the magic wand. And if it's not the magic wand showing, you want to open up that drawer and click on the magic wand. Magic wand is not an AI tool. It's not a mysterious tool at all. It doesn't try to have any kind of machine learning as part of it. The reason we don't do so much with the object selection tool or the quick selection tool is both of those are algorithmic machine learning, trying to guess what you want without you having to be too specific. That's great for amateur use. It's not good for professional use because you want to really know what you're doing. So we're going to use the lasso tool in this class and the magic wand tool. What the magic wand tool does is it selects pixels that are touching each other, right? And you get to decide how similar those pixels need to be selected. If you're familiar with MS Paint or just old raster programs, it's how the paint bucket works. So you click somewhere, but if the pixels are similar enough to where you clicked, all of them will get filled in, right? In this case, if the pixels are similar enough to what you click with the magic wand, then those pixels will get selected along with the pixel you clicked. So if I want to select black pixels, where do I click? On any black pixel, right? So these are the default settings. They're up here. Every time we use a tool, you'll see all its settings up here. These are important. The default settings for the magic wand is a tolerance of 32. That's out of 100. That basically means that the pixels need to be at least 1/3 similar to the pixel you clicked. And if we needed to tighten that up, if this selected things that weren't close enough to black, I could tighten that up to 12 tolerance or 2 tolerance. And then the lower the tolerance number, it means the more closely it needs to match that original pixel you click. But 32 is a good start for this. The other setting we want to pay attention to is contiguous. Contiguous means that not only are the pixels similar, but they're touching. We do not want that because we want all the black line art, even the black line art that's floating off on its own and not touching the black line art that we clicked on. So these defaults are what we need for the magic wand this time. Now it's selected all of those blacks. You can see the little marching ants around those black lines. How can we separate that from the rest? Because if we hit delete, it will delete the very thing we want to keep, right? So there's two ways to do this. I showed you this way last class. That is to reverse your selection. So right now we are selecting only black pixels. But we want to delete everything that's not black pixels. So we can go to select up at the top, and then we can swap that selection for the negative, for the inverse. So that everything that is selected now will now not be selected, and everything else in that layer will be selected. So when I do that, it looks very similar, except that now it's selecting all the way to the edge of the frame, because now it's everything except the black pixels. And now if I hit delete, it will just leave behind the black line art. Now I'm going to show you a different way. So I'm going to go back in my history, or I'm going to do Command Z a couple times. So now I'll actually go before I even use the magic wand. And I'm going to select the black line art again. This is another way. In some ways it's a faster way, but you have to understand what it's doing. This is a shortcut I want you to learn today. It's incredibly helpful. I'm going to write it up on the board. That's Command. This is the raster program photo